So that's why I always say, like, you're always going to have a culture by design or default.
Success can look perfect from the outside. The Super Bowl ring, the NFL career, the standing ovations. But what happens when the cheering stops and your identity is suddenly tested? Today's guest, Super Bowl champion Ben Utecht, knows that struggle firsthand. After winning it all with the Indianapolis Colts, Ben faced devastating concussions, uncertainty, and the challenge of rebuilding purpose beyond football. Now, as an author, speaker, and chief culture officer, he's helping leaders, teams, and families create lives grounded in belief, resilience, and meaningful connection. This conversation is about leadership, identity, and overcoming adversity, and what it truly means to win in life. I'm Larry Sprung, your host for the Mitlin Money Mindset and founder and wealth advisor of Mitlin Financial. Let's dive into the show. Well, I am super excited, as I said in the intro, to have Ben Utecht with us, Chief Culture Officer, speaker, author, and Super Bowl champion. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thanks, Lawrence, man. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about what you're up to as an entrepreneur today. You know, we have a great following in the entrepreneurial community. But before we jump into that, can you share with our audience, with our listeners, a bit about who you are and kind of what led you up to this entrepreneurial journey that you're on now?
It's still a bit of a mystery how I went from my first career, where my job was to hit people for a living, to my second career, where my job is to care about people for a living. And really that journey is what brought me into entrepreneurialism. I grew up in a small river town in Minnesota, was blessed to play football on a scholarship to the University of Minnesota, where I transitioned to being a tight end. And that really changed my trajectory, and had an opportunity to play 7 years in the NFL, winning a Super Bowl in 2006 with the Indianapolis Colts, and then ended my career in Cincinnati. Unfortunately, had a career-ending concussion, which cut my career short by a number of years. But that really launched me into my other passions. And one of those was speaking. My degree was public speaking. My dad's been a pastor for 50 years, so I grew up watching a man use words every week to positively transform people. And I was drawn to that. I knew I wanted to use my voice. I just didn't know what my story was until stepping into that locker room with Tony Dungy, who was the first to win a Super Bowl built on servant leadership. Mm-hmm. The belief that if you build better men, you get better football players. And that really, captivated me, because that was a different kind of leadership style in sports at that time. And that really became my story. You know, I couldn't get past this unbelievable culture that he created that not only demanded excellence through execution, but in parallel, it was about unlocking purpose in the lives of every single one of his players. Wow. And so I began telling that story and building programs around that. And that really brought me into the national and global speaking platform, and then brought me into the C-suite of a private equity company in Minnesota to be their chief culture officer, which was great because it took me from being an inspirationalist to an operationalist of culture. And in that journey, especially in private equity, just learning so much about entrepreneurialism, had the opportunity to launch a few companies, be a part of some startups. So I've learned a lot, not only as a founder and business owner, board chair, chief executive, culture officer, and all of that, I think, has really culminated to where I'm at today, launching my first business book, The Champion's Creed, and getting really close to our MVPs on a couple of pretty amazing culture software platforms to help companies. So a little bit of my journey there.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the business end of things, but before we do, I want to talk about the football end of things.
Yeah, let's go.
I think you're in a very small group of people, right? It's a very small group of people that make it to the NFL. It's even a smaller group of people that have a career even the length of yours. And then it's even smaller than a group of people as far as people who win Super Bowls. And I know there are a lot of parents out there and entrepreneurs who have kids that, have big dreams. So, as a former NFL player who's won the Super Bowl, what's your advice for parents who have children with big dreams?
Man, what a great question. And being a father of 4 daughters who are very talented volleyball players, I've had to ask myself that same question, right? Because you're always feeling the tension that's within the balance of trying to do whatever you can to support your child's dream, and at the same time being realistic, right? So that you can prepare them for life in a healthy way. And I can only speak from my own experience, but my parents did such a great job of giving me every opportunity to try every sport that I was interested in. And along the journey, helped me really focus on the sports that I was really excelling in, and doing whatever they could to support my training, both on and off the field, bringing me to summer camps every year. I mean, whatever they could do to pour into that passion. And then really over time, the athletic ability, the physical size, is all going to really start to tell that story. And I think that's the one thing that parents, really need to be able to do is you have to support your kids' dreams and passions, right? Because that's going to build so many life and value principles within their own personal identity. At the same time, you got to sit back and also be a reader. You've got to read their story, because what's going to end up happening over time is it will naturally filter. And that story is going to tell you whether or not they have the ability to really play at that next level. And if that starts to be their story, now you start to support them in those different ways to help them get to the next level. And that was really what happened to me. I mean, I was always a big guy. So I'm 6'7", 250 pounds, and I'm fast. And so, it just, as I got into my later high school years, it just became more obvious. That was my story. And then that brought me to Division I football. Same thing happened in Division I football, and that filtration process. By the end of my college career, I was one of the top tight ends in the country. And the story was telling my parents, okay, there's a real opportunity here. So how do we support Ben in that?
Yeah. Don't ignore it, be able to see it, but support and be realistic about that story, I think, too, right?
Absolutely.
You went from this situation where you had this athleticism supporting your dream, and during your time with the Colts, NFL Hall of Fame coach Tony Dungy, who you mentioned earlier, presented you with the Uncommon Leader Award for your leadership on and off the field. How do you see that award now, translating into your life after the NFL?
Wow. Yeah. Well, first of all, that was unbelievably unexpected, right? It's that big trophy right here. And the year before, it went to one of my teammates, Peyton Manning. And I remember when Coach Dungy called me to present me with the award, I was pretty taken aback, because I had a good career, but I didn't have a Peyton Manning career. And so
a lot of people do.
No, right. But not even a Pro Bowl career. I had a number of injuries that were always a problem. And I had associated talent and, kind of that athletic profile to the award. And that was the moment where he just said, Ben, it has nothing to do with that. Like, he and his wife, developed this to highlight players that not only understood what integrity looked like on the field, but wanted to live a life of integrity and character off the field. And So it was a huge honor to receive that. How does it apply to my life today? I think the idea of being uncommon is really cool. I've always enjoyed, that kind of visual of moving against the flow. And so, to be uncommon is to just do things in a unique and different way that positively impact people. And so I'm trying to bring that type of uncommon leadership into everything that I do today, from business and culture transformation to being a husband and a father of 4 daughters. How do I lead them with integrity and character in a way that really unlocks the purpose that they have on their life, like Tony Dungy did for me?
Yeah. I think it's so important, and I think it gets missed by a lot of people, how the skills and the talents that you use on the field, on the ice, whatever your sport is, whatever your athleticism is, how that really can translate, if you let it to translate into life. And really, a lot of those skills are so beneficial in so many ways. Absolutely. And I think sometimes that gets lost. You mentioned earlier about Tony Dungy, about his kind of approach to, the locker room and, servant leadership. And, what did his approach in the locker room really teach you about leadership?
How long is the podcast? There are so many principles that I could talk about. I would say that, Tony's first book was called Quiet Strength. And I like to call it bold grace. And grace is defined as to act with kindness and clemency. The boldness part was that he still demanded excellence. When we walked into our locker room, on the white wall in blue letters was no excuses, no explanations. The only way to win is through execution. So Tony Dungy set an unbelievably high bar. But the way in which he held players accountable was unique, right? In sports, you have a lot of old school leadership styles that really drive performance through fear. And this happens in business too.
Well, very much so. Families too.
100%. And the reason why is fear gets results, but it's not sustainable, right? And it doesn't build identity, and it doesn't unlock purpose. It suppresses it, right? Which makes it unsustainable. But Tony had this ability to challenge you, to hold you accountable to your performance expectations, and at the same time, kind of pour life into you, right? And that was really unique for me. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was a time where I made a mistake at the end of a game that lost us the game, and that next day I went early into the facility to watch the film, and here Coach Dungy comes walking down the hallway, and he pulled me aside and said, "Hey, this team meeting is going to be really hard for you because we're going to spotlight your mistake, and you're going to hear some things that are going to be very challenging." And then he said, "But I want you to know that I believe in you. I'm going to do whatever I can to support you in helping you develop in this area because you need to if you want to continue to play." It was the craziest feeling though, because the way in which he held me accountable made me feel better about myself. even though he said, "Hey, this is the expectation, and if you're not playing here, we're gonna have to make some decisions," right? So he was bold in the way that he presented what his expectations were, but he presented it with grace, which made me walk away feeling like I've got a coach that believes in me, who supports me, and everything is going to be okay.
How'd that meeting go, by the way, with the players?
It was brutal. but because he prepared me for it in the way he prepared me for it, while I was in the meeting, I never lost sight of the words, "I believe in you."
Yeah. So had he not done that, how do you think that would have affected you?
Oh man, I probably would have walked out of there feeling like my job was in limbo. I would have put a tremendous amount of stress and pressure on myself. as a perfectionist, especially, to have to go out and prove myself. And again, that would have elicited this feeling of fear and anxiety that was driving my performance versus belief that was driving my performance. So.
Yeah. What an amazing way to do that. Let's pause for a moment. What actually brings you joy? It's something most people never think about, yet it shapes how your life unfolds. You're busy. You make responsible choices. You even plan ahead. But have you slowed down long enough to ask if what you're building supports a life you enjoy living? That's the reason I built my YouTube channel, to help you bring more joy to your money journey. Sure, we'll talk about all the essentials, but my real goal is to help you connect your finances with what brings you joy, because money is the tool that funds the moments that matter. If you want to explore that connection more deeply, visit my YouTube channel at Larry Sprung. We've had a number of professional athletes on here, and I know a number of professional athletes, and it always seems like there are, a lot of struggles that athletes encounter when the cheering stops, when they're no longer going out on the field on Sunday or going out to the rink on, 3-4 times a week and hanging in the locker room with the guys, no matter what sport you're doing, right? How did you find that purpose after the NFL to make that transition?
It's a great question. It all comes down to identity. And I'll never forget the first team meeting. Coach Dungy came in, and he would always start the team meeting by talking about his famous coach at the Steelers, Chuck Noll. And he'd say, "Men, if you're sitting in this room and your entire identity is wrapped up in a sport, you've completely missed the purpose of your life." That's the first sentence said every year to a group of men who have given their lives completely over to a sport. Right. So right away, attacking that identity. And so, for me, especially growing up in a faith-based family, we talked a lot about identity, and we talked a lot about discovering and believing that your life has significance and has a purpose. And so that's really the foundation for me, was really believing that, yes, part of my identity, part of my vocational identity now is to use my gift and talent as an athlete, to provide a service. But it wasn't the foundation of who I am and who I was created to be, that there's a purpose behind that that's much more significant. And that purpose is to positively impact people, right? And so when I retired, as hard as it was, and that transition had its ups and downs, but that constant, through the summits and the valleys, was a belief that I was made to do something significant. And that's ultimately what drives me, to keep going and to keep pursuing these other passions, because football was always just going to be a moment in my story. I was already speaking, professionally at that point. I also have this hidden talent as a professional singer.
Wow.
And I had signed a record deal out of Nashville while I was playing in Indianapolis. So I was fostering these other passions of mine and developing them alongside of continuing to develop as a football player. And so my transition was a little bit easier, I think, than others, because I knew what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been developing those skills alongside of football. And I do think a big part of that was Tony's development in me.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. So, for our listeners, because you're self-described as a chief culture officer. Can you share, what do you mean by that? What does that role entail, when you're talking about a business or a company or, your talks?
Yeah. This is a relatively new C-suite title that's entered the market over the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years. And basically, the chief culture officer is the COO of culture, right? So when you bring in a chief operational officer, you're bringing in an executive leader whose primary job is to oversee and hold accountable the business strategy and the operation of the organization. And so that's what the chief culture officer does for culture. So if you're a company that truly cares about culture, that understands its potential in not only developing leadership, but every team member, ultimately improving retention, improving performance, productivity, profitability, right? You're bringing in this kind of a leader in order to oversee that, to build the strategy, to build the practicable systems of development for the organization, and ultimately productize the culture. You want to be able to define the culture with depth, hire towards culture alignment, develop towards the beliefs and values of a company, and really create that culture KPI. How are we learning from our employees what they believe about the culture, so that we can, like the lean manufacturing process, we can make continuous improvements over time for that culture. So that executive focuses completely on the culture and the people development of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's so important. We talk about it here, and we're a small organization. We're a team of 8, and I think it's even more important being small, because we talk about all the time. We are very mindful that we don't want to bring in any cultural terrorists, because all you need is one of those, and it really disrupts the whole culture of the organization. And in a bigger organization, you might need more of them to really infiltrate. But once you have one, it starts multiplying, it seems like. So this is really to help prevent that and really embed that culture that's being, drawn down from the organizational level, it sounds like.
Oh, 100%. And it really does start with how you define your culture. And I think, as kindly as I can say, if your culture is defined by a handful of core values that are hidden on an about page on a website, you've completely missed what defining culture is all about. And the very first thing that I did in the private equity company is I took their 8 core value principles, and I did a foundational belief survey with the entire leadership team. What do they believe about the value principle? Why do they believe the value principle matters? And most importantly, how do they believe the value principle should be practiced in the workplace? And what came out of that survey data was the creation of our first culture creed. And a creed is defined as a set of beliefs that guide the behaviors and actions of people. So 8 core values hidden on an about page on the website turned into a 32-page culture onboarding and educational training manual.
Wow.
And so not only did that help us in our interview process, in our onboarding process, but Lawrence, it differentiated us in the marketplace. Right?
Yep.
It added to business development, because we could sit across the table from somebody and we could share this organizational creed with them, and it set us apart from other private equity groups.
Right.
And so there's so much more depth and clarity that can come out of truly defining your culture, so that it ultimately drives you towards your expectations and outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, so you just mentioned this 32-page cultural creed document that you mentioned, right? And I think that dovetails nicely into the fact that you wrote a book, and it was called The Champion's Creed: Transform Your Culture Through the Power of Belief. Who is the audience, and what do you hope that readers will take away from the book?
Well, it's a broad audience, because the book really shows not only how you can build winning culture in business, but how you can build winning culture in life. The same strategy and systems that you can create to develop transformational culture at business, you can bring home. And that's what we're trying to do here in our house with our family as well. And I think the core disruptor or differentiator in my approach to culture is to really lean in to, believe it or not, what academia says about every culture in the world. So Dr. Edgar Schein, known as the godfather of organizational culture, right, a renowned organizational psychologist, says that every culture in the world comes out of the espoused beliefs, assumptions, and artifacts of the community, not value principles. Every company does mission, vision, value principles, and they sit around a board table and they talk about what they believe in order to choose the artifacts of those beliefs, right? Which is the core values. The values are radically important because they are the symbols, but all of the meat that allows you to truly build strategy and system comes out of the beliefs of executive leadership, because culture is the leader's choice. And so if we understand that culture comes out of the foundation of belief, now we have an opportunity to spend time really understanding and identifying what those core beliefs are, choosing the value principles that are reflective of that, and then building the strategy and systems out of those foundational beliefs. Because ultimately, and this happens, when I do workshops with boards or C-suites, and one of their value principles is integrity, and I have each of them go around the table and to define what they believe about integrity, I get 10 different answers. And so you can have a value principle like integrity, but if you have misalignment around what is integrity, why does integrity matter, and how should integrity be practiced, right? Then you can create some of that culture toxicity that exists. So anyway, I think that's really the core takeaway is to understand that culture development, human development really comes out of the foundation of belief.
Yeah. Great point. Great book. Get out, buy it, read it. I think you'll find it very educational. Let's talk now about your public speaking also. When you go out on stage and you're talking to the crowd or the group, whatever it may be, what's the one takeaway that you hope every single person that's listening to you and in that audience leaves with?
Well, I mean, very, very similar to the foundation of the book. The whole goal is to really inspire people to understand how radically important culture is in the value of an organization, and that it starts with the foundation of belief, right? And so that my job when I'm on the stage is to inspire and to educate and ultimately provide application so that people can go and do. I think sometimes as a speaker, when you just listen to a motivationalist, you might feel better for the next couple of days, but then you don't really have anything that you can apply that's scalable or sustainable over time. And so for me, especially coming out of a C-suite, executive situation, my job as a speaker is really to inspire, but to build knowledge and understanding, and then to give application so that people can go and do, right? So not only do I speak about culture, but I actually go in and help organizations define their culture, hire towards their culture, develop towards their culture, creating solutions so that we can actually go in and do transformational work. And that's really ultimately, I think, how you build a successful speaking platform is not just by using your voice, but by creating solutions that can actually make a difference and make organizations more profitable.
Yeah. I think, and this is what you're saying is, if people feel inspired, that's one thing, but if they leave there and do nothing, that's really not the end goal. You want them to feel inspired enough that they're going to go out and put something to action almost immediately.
That's what it is, right? And I can say it this way. One of my mentors was the culture architect for United Health Group, so 600,000 employees. Imagine how do you figure out culture for for that large of an organization. Well, the one thing that he taught me, and he's a PhD in leadership from Harvard, and he said, culture can never be a program, because a program is the practicing of social conformity.
Right.
And so when you come into a community and you say, this is the program, be obedient to the program, right? You're forcing people to take action in something that they may not believe in.
Right. He
said culture needs to be a movement, and a movement is defined as a singular or community belief turned into action.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a great point that you made. It really needs to be, you're really trying to inspire people towards creating a culture movement.
Yeah.
Right? You're taking belief and you're putting that belief into action. You're doing something about it.
Yeah, when you shared those doctor's thoughts, the immediate thing I thought of was that the story about the guy who was a janitor and he's sweeping the building and
1961. Yep.
Yeah, and they're like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm helping to put the man on the moon, right? And that's like the true definition of culture and being bought in and everybody being aligned with the same mission.
But the great thing about that story, right? You've got Kennedy walking the halls of NASA and he comes across this janitor. Sir, what's your job here at NASA? My job is to put a man on the moon. But you got to understand that part of what NASA was teaching was the belief that every single person that worked for NASA was aligned towards that singular goal. So it was a belief and a value principle that was taught and coached to the employees of NASA. And so that's why I always say, like, you're always going to have a culture by design or default.
That's
so
true.
Why not design it?
There you go. Well, on that note, I think that's a great way to end the questions or the conversation for today. But we always have one final question that we ask each of our guests, and we've done it every single episode because we are all about joy on the Mitlin Money Mindset. And that question is, what did you do today, Ben, that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
Wow. Well, we have a routine where my wife and I get up just before the 4 girls, because then it gets loud and a little dramatic every morning. And we make a cup of coffee and we sit down, for 20 to 30 minutes, and we, come together as husband and wife, kind of set the tone for the day, talk about goals, schedules, doing whatever we can to really, create a successful foundation, for the day. And that always gives me joy. It always gives me joy, which is a great, I'm so glad you use the word joy versus happiness, because happiness is an emotional condition, but joy is a spiritual condition.
I agree. And
so I really appreciate that, right? Because if we can live our lives on the foundation of joy, no matter whether we're at a high point or a low point, we're going to find that purpose is consistent.
That's right. Well, thank you for sharing that and sharing that with our listeners. I appreciate it. And Ben, we're going to have all of your information in the show notes. But if people want to learn more about you, connect with you, learn about your speaking engagements, you as a chief cultural officer, or find the book, The Champion's Creed, what's the easiest and the best way for them to do that?
The 2 easiest platforms are LinkedIn. I'm very accessible. I respond to everybody. So please reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm putting out great educational and inspirational content. And then my website, benutechtspeaks.com. And I look forward to connecting with you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ben. It's been a pleasure. I've gotten a lot of joy out of our conversation, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You too, sir.
Ben Utecht's story reminds us that our greatest victories aren't always the moments the world applauds. Sometimes they're the moments we choose to rebuild, rediscover purpose, and lead with belief through life's hardest transitions. From the NFL and a Super Bowl championship to overcoming concussions, redefining identity, and helping organizations build stronger cultures, Ben showed us what resilience and meaningful leadership really look like. If today's conversation spoke to you, there's a reason for that, because success without purpose never feels complete. And here on the Mitlin Money Mindset, those are the conversations that keep us growing together. Ben Utecht and all he's up to can be found across most social media platforms. All the contact information needed to find him can be found in the show notes.